What's good, guys? Welcome back to Small Talk on Head-to-Head Fantasy Basketball. Today, we'll be joined by two hosts again. My name is Alan.
And I'm Anson. Today we're going to be going over tier three of the upcoming 2024 ESPN Fantasy Head-to-Head Points League. We already did tiers one and two. Y'all go make sure to check it out. Link in the description. But we're going to be also dropping tiers four, five, six, etc. So make sure you subscribe and follow for more.
Let's get into it. All right, we're going to do a quick recap of our top, tier one and tier two. So, beginning of tier one, we have Jokic, right? Followed by Luka Doncic, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jason Tatum, SGA. And then start of tier two, we have Tyrese Halliburton, Stephen Curry, Damian Lillard, Kevin Durant, LaMelo Ball, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, DeMontis Sabonis, Trae Young, Pascal Siakam, Donovan Mitchell, James Harden, and finally Anthony Edwards. Okay, so if you guys want to see our insights or you want to hear what we talked about these players specifically, go watch our first video, right? That'll be in our channel or it'll be in the link below, right? So we're going to start after Anthony Edwards. We're going to be talking about tier three. And beginning of tier three, we have Ja Morant. Okay. I know some of you guys might have Ja Morant higher, but the reason why, we put him here is because he is going to be out for 25 games. So that means his first game in fantasy is going to be in December, mid-December, not even the beginning, mid-December. So if you're willing to take a pick, on Ja Morant, you have to understand you're probably going to lose like 3 or 4 weeks, right? If you don't draft well and you draft averagely, you're using a high pick on Ja Morant, who is not going to play for the first 25 games, right? So you have to kind of understand, like, hey, if he doesn't play for me for 25 games, let's say on average they play 3 games a week, right? That's about 7 weeks, 8 weeks, right? So you really kind of have to decide, like, hey, am I going to be able to tank for 7 weeks, right? Yeah, when he comes back, you also have to deal with injury risks, right? But as of right now, his fantasy stats of last year were pretty good. 61 games played, average about 45 fantasy points, which is really, really good. But like I did say right now, he's going to be out for 25 games, right? So I think the 25 games will take a very big hit on his fantasy value, but I still think he's obviously a must roster player, and I think around here is a good pick for him.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think right here is perfect for him because if we're talking about why he isn't in tier two consists of the top 20 players. Last year per game, Ja Morant was ranked at 18th, which would put him in that tier, but he's guaranteed to miss 25 games. And even outside of that 25 game suspension, we all know Ja Morant's very injury prone. Last year, although he ranked at 18 in terms of per game averages, he actually ranked at 100 last year because of all the off-court drama of him getting in trouble, getting some help. He actually ranked at 100, only totaling 2100 fantasy points per game. And if you think that, okay, outside of that 25 game suspension, what if he's amazing? What if he takes that jump? Last year he averaged 45. What if he averages 50 fantasy points? If you do the math on that, if he plays every single game, which is unlikely, but if he plays every single game besides that 25 game suspension, you would have 57 times 50 fantasy points. I would say that's already a ceiling projection for Ja Morant. If you think he'll have another step up to his game, and that would be 2850, which would still rank him at 30. If you're looking at last year's numbers, it would rank him right above only Zach LaVine. So he would be a 30th ranked player, which puts him in this tier.
Yeah, yeah. So, just understand the precautions when you guys want to draft Ja Morant. All right. Moving on from Ja Morant, we have Uncle Drew, aka Kyrie Irving. Right. So we already know what he can do with the basketball. All right. This guy is a wizard with the ball. The only issue is what everyone kind of sees right now. He also deals with a lot of off-court issues, right? So he will miss games, right? So last year he played 60 games, which is really good, right? We did have years, where if the COVID comes around, we know Kyrie's an anti-vax, so he might not play more games if something happens, throughout the season. We don't know what's going to happen, right? But you also have to consider him like, he's really, really good when he's playing. The question is, I mean, the keyword is when he's playing, right? But there's not much to say about Kyrie. I think he's going to do really good this season, right? Average 48.7 last year. So maybe he's going to average a little bit more, a little bit less than that this year, right? He is playing alongside Luka, but I don't think that should be too much of an impact this year. So I think Kyrie Irving's in store for a really, really good season.
Yeah, I really like Kyrie here because when he is playing, he has that similar. You should view him the same way as you view Ja Morant, where when they're on the court, they're really, really good. It's just that there's a lot of question marks of him being on the court. Last year, he was ranked 18th in terms of per game, but he drops to 20th when it comes to total amount of points. So he's actually plays pretty good with Luka, so you don't have to worry about that. Last year after the trade deadline, he ranked as the seventh best fantasy player, which would put him borderline tier one. You just have to, just be very wary of his not only his injuries, but like Alan said, it's injuries on top of off court drama.
Yeah, yeah. So let's move on from Kyrie Irving. We have Jimmy Butler, right? We already know what Butler can do. Crazy fantasy player, right? Great NBA player as well, right? Took his team from the bottom all the way to the conference finals, right? I think Jimmy Butler's a very, very good player in fantasy wise, right? The only concern I will really bring up is that there is injury risk because he is getting older, right? He tries to play a lot, tries to play hard. That does put a lot of wear and tear on the body. Right. There's also news that maybe Damian Lillard is going to come to Miami. Right. As of right now, there's no confirmation yet. It's all rumors right now. Trade talks are going on. Right. So I feel like Jimmy Butler at this part of the draft right here, it's a really good position to pick him up. Right. I don't think there's too much concern about his fantasy output as well this year. If Dame does come, okay, so be it. But I think Butler will still be able to perform well in fantasy. Right. I think he's in store for a really good season as well.
Yeah, he's another one of those players where the per game is really above their average. So it's just something to consider. He is getting a year older. He's already 33. He's gonna be 34 next year. So it's just something to consider. If Dame comes, then he'll have less scoring opportunities, but I'm sure he can always get fantasy points, whether it's steals, assists, rebounds. He just does whatever the team needs. If Damian Lillard doesn't join, there's still some question about how healthy Tyler Hero will be. There's clips of him shooting around, but he's coming off a broken hand injury. So you might get a slight boost from Jimmy Butler because he's the type of player that just does whatever his team needs. And if there's no Tyler Hero, there'll be less scoring. So it might be a slight jump on Jimmy Butler, but if you put everything in consideration, I think he's right here at tier three.
Yeah, yeah. Let's move on from Jimmy Butler. We have Kawhi Leonard. So the thing about Kawhi Leonard I want you to bring up is I know he's injury prone, right? We see that he played 52 games last year. The thing is when he plays, he's also just like Kyrie, really, really dominant on the court, really performs really well in fantasy, very efficient, right? It's just that he's been dealing with injuries, the past 3 seasons. And even this season, right? When I drafted him, he was healthy this year. All of a sudden he's saying, "Hey, my knee's not feeling 100%." So they had to rehab him. They put him on the side, and it's one of those gambles that I just accept it. It's like, hey, I drafted him. I know what he's gonna be injured. He's gonna get injured. So I have to understand like, hey, if I'm drafting this player, you know, there's injury risk behind it. Then you have to be okay with that, right? But when he's playing, he does really really well. Averages 44.2 last season. But I do think that average is a bit lower just because he had a very slow start, right? And the other thing is that Kawhi Leonard is also a forward, right? If you go back to our first video, you'll notice that hey, we were talking about like there's a lack of forwards in fantasy this year, just because ESPN is already talking saying hey, every player's gonna have one position only, and that affects a lot of players, right? A lot of players that are either shooting guard and small forward eligible, they're not no longer eligible for that. They're only eligible for one position, right? So now you kind of have to draft in a way where, hey, I have to draft a forward or I have to draft a center, a little bit earlier, just because if I don't, other people they stack them, they stack them up. You can't really get a good forward, right? So Kawhi Leonard here, I feel like it's a good pick, right? I know he is getting older, he has injury issues, but overall, if he's able to stay healthy and perform and play well, I think he's a really good pick for fantasy.
Yeah, in this tier, you should be aiming for players that average close to 40, 44, 45 fantasy points. And if they have injury concerns, it usually drops their fantasy point by maybe 3 or 4. With Kawhi, he's already at 44, so you might be okay. He has 44 average, and he has injury concerns. Why is he in this tier? Um, Alan mentioned it earlier, but I'll bring up the numbers that he had a slow start. When he got accustomed, when he was feeling like himself again, the last 20 games, he averaged 48.8, putting him at the 14th best player last year in fantasy basketball. So if you get that 48.8, and if he's ready to go at that level, you drop it by 3 because of his injury concerns. I think he's right here at 45. If he slides past around this range, I think it's a really good chance to get him. You do have to worry whether or not he will kind of take a step back on the offensive end because Russell Westbrook is there. Maybe he'll just let Russell kind of run the offense and they'll place high enough in the regular season. But regardless, I think Kawhi Leonard, he's just too good, too efficient for you not, to grab him around this range.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Okay, moving on from Kawhi Leonard, we have De'Aaron Fox. Okay, so I do understand, some of you guys might have De'Aaron Fox a lot higher, some of you guys might have De'Aaron Fox a lot lower, right? But in my opinion, I feel De'Aaron Fox has proven himself last season that, hey, he deserves to be in tier 3. He deserves to be alongside like Kawhi, like Jimmy Butler, right? He's a dog. He plays 73 games total, right? Average 43.1 fantasy points. And I feel like this year, this new season, he could improve on that. He could do a little bit more, right? He established himself like, hey, I'm the go-to guy. Give me the ball. I'll play, make better. I'll shoot more threes, maybe, right? If he does more of this, if he averages, one more assist or maybe one more three-pointer, it pushes his average up to 45, 45, 46, right? I could definitely see something like that for De'Aaron Fox this season.
Yeah, and if you look at post trade deadline, the last 15 to 20 games from De'Aaron Fox, he does average 45 fantasy points. I think the real value in drafting De'Aaron Fox, compared to the first 3 guys we mentioned, is that De'Aaron Fox played 73 games, so he was ranked as 26 in terms of per game average at 43 fantasy points per game. However, if you take in consideration of totals, he actually ranks 12, which is tier 2 value. So you gotta have to kind of take that in mind. He is a point guard, so you gotta kind of make a decision there. But he's also in that age where he can keep improving.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said there. Going on from Fox, let's see who we have next. We have Devin Booker. Okay, I know this one. Devin Booker is probably going to be a hot topic right now, just because everyone's not unsure where to draft them. Right? They're like, hey, what position is he playing? We're not sure yet. Right? He could be playing shooting guard like he did last year, or he might be playing point guard, allowing Bradley Beal to slide in shooting guard. Right? So let's just go on the basis that Devin Booker does play point guard here. Right? That would give him more ball handling duties. Right? He'd be averaging more assists. Right? Obviously the games played is 53 at right as of like last season, just because he did get injured in the beginning of the season. He was out for like a month or so, right? But I feel like Devin Booker's gonna be a really, really good pick here, just because I know he is playing alongside of Kevin Durant, right? But I don't think there should be an issue with him getting less touches. I think he'll be one of the players that still get his 15 to 20 shots up every night, right? Maybe even play more a little bit more, so that should help his average out. So I wouldn't be surprised if Devin Booker has a great season this year.
Yeah, and his last 23 games, which was about the time when Kevin Durant joined, his last 23 games with Kevin Durant, he actually averaged 45.2. So his averages were higher with Kevin Durant. I don't think it's a concern. Maybe Bradley Beal could affect kind of how much he produces just because Bradley Beal does take more shot attempts than Chris Paul, but it kind of goes both ways where, okay, there's no Chris Paul. Like you said, he might be the point guard. Chris Devin Booker will have a lot of the responsibilities that Chris Paul has. Will have more assist opportunities. So yeah, I think there's definitely some upside for Devin Booker.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with you. Everything you said there. Okay, and next we have DeMar DeRozan. All right, so DeMar DeRozan, last year he had a really great year in my opinion. He played 74 games, averaged out 41.5 fantasy points. And the thing is, DeMar DeRozan is also a forward. So you want to start keeping positions in mind. You have to understand that the draft this year, you can't just go. If you get Luka first, you can't just go, okay, Luka, and I'm gonna get Dame, and I'm gonna get like LaMelo, and I'm gonna get De'Aaron Fox. Like at that point, you realize, oh, whoa, I have 4 point guards. It's gonna be very, very hard to draft forwards because like everyone else is either grabbing your forwards up, and then you're gonna have to grab like I don't know, John Collins, right, PJ Washington, and you don't want to be stuck with those guys, right? So you gotta understand, hey, DeRozan is playing 74 games. He averages 41.5 fantasy points, right? If we just compare him to another like point guard around this level here, right? You can say, hey, he is a forward and it can fit my forward eligibility. Okay, I'm gonna grab DeMar DeRozan here, right? There is, the idea that he's really reached his ceiling and he might start regressing a little bit, right? He is getting older, so I do want you guys to understand that. But I still think this season will still be a really solid season for DeRozan this year.
Yeah, with DeRozan, you're just picking the safer play. He played 74 games last year, which is really good. And even if he regresses, I think his spot's pretty solidified. In the Chicago Bulls, they don't really have anyone else besides Zach LaVine. But even if he's second to LaVine next year, um, there's just no one else on that roster to put up points. So yeah, I think DeRozan is very safe. If you look at last year in terms of totals, because he did play 74 games, he actually ranked in at 15th, which is why we have him in this tier despite him only averaging 41 fantasy points.
Yep. Yep. Next from DeRozan, we have Mr. Jaylen Brown. Okay, this guy just signed probably one of the biggest contracts in the NBA as of right now. All right, there's a lot of people that are unsure about Jaylen Brown, but I feel like he's going to be taking on more ball handling duties just because Marcus Smart is gone now. So it's going to be Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Kristaps Porzingis. All right. Uh, Jaylen Brown, I feel like he is developing as a player still as well, right? He's finding his flow. He's seeing what he likes to do on the court, what his habits are. Because I still feel like he's really raw. I think he can still, hone down his skill a little bit, tone it down a little bit, understand the pace of the game a little bit better. Maybe get a left hand this year. But even if he does get a little better, I feel like him playing 67 games, averaging 41 last season. I feel like this season he can do around the same or even a little bit better, right? I think he's young. He is able to progress and grow, and I feel like this year might be his year. Who knows, right? This year for Jaylen Brown might be a really really good season this year for him. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I have to say about Jaylen Brown.
Yeah, there's two ways to look at that contract. The first way, the optimistic way, is just okay. He's just signed the biggest contract. He is getting a lot of criticism because of his last playoff series for not having a left hand. So maybe he's out to prove something. Another way to look at it is what if he gets complacent because now his kids are all, they're good. Biggest contract in NBA history. So it's just, you can look at it in two different ways, but without Marcus Smart there, he's kind of forced to handle the ball more. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. Let's see what we can do for us this year. Next is Jalen Brunson, the other Jalen. All right. So Jalen Brunson, I feel like he's becoming one of my favorite players to watch in the league. Right. Coming over from Dallas, I was unsure what he can do, but after this year, I have no more doubts. Right. I feel like Jalen Brunson is a young superstar in the making. Right. He is leading the Knicks. Right. He's like, hey, you guys needed a go-to player. Besides Randle, I'm that guy. Right. I feel like the way he plays, he's not afraid. He's very gritty. He's able to go on ahead, like head down, put his head down and start taking and getting a bucket. Right. Just look at his games played. Played 68 games, averaged 41 fantasy points. As a first year in the Knicks, and I'm like, hey, this is really really good for him. Right. I think he's gonna keep getting better. Right. I also don't think that average is accurate, just because I do believe that he had a slow start. Anson will correct me in a little bit, but I do believe he had a slower start. But yeah, I think Jalen Brunson's going to be in for a really, really good season this year.
Yeah, Jalen Brunson plays like such a veteran. It's kind of hard to it's kind of easy to forget that he only played 5 seasons in the league, so he still has a lot of chance to improve. As of the slow start, he definitely had a slow start last year. It kind of takes a while for every player, not just Brunson, but every single player that enters the Knicks. It kind of takes a while for Tom Thibodeau to kind of trust them. So Jalen Brunson didn't really get the typical Tom Thibodeau starter minutes when he first joined. He did get 34 minutes and then 32 minutes his first month. It helped him get 18 points per game and then 22.5 per game. But we'll see a huge spike once he got acclimated into the Tom Thibodeau system. Um, he continued 18 points per game in January, only 32 minutes. In February, however, he gained Tom Thibodeau's trust and he started getting 40 minutes a game, which puts his points per game average all the way up to 28.7 fantasy points per game. I think he's kind of solidified into that. Okay, this is now Brunson's team for the time being, unless they get unless they can somehow trade for a big star like Zion or or Donovan Mitchell, anything like that. Just assume that Jalen Brunson's gonna keep taking on these responsibilities. In March, he had 27 points per game with 38 minutes. And then in April, he had 27 points per game. I expect for him to keep the minutes around 36 to 37 for the entirety of next season. And I expect maybe 27 fantasy points per game. 27 points per game next season. So, although he only averaged 40.9 fantasy points last year, his last 16 games, he averaged 44 fantasy points. And I expect around 44 to 46 fantasy points for the upcoming season.
Yeah, I can definitely see him doing that 44 to 46 fantasy points this season. Right, let's see. I know he's going to take a jump. I want to see how big of that jump that it will be. So moving on from Brunson, we have Lauri Markkanen. Okay, Lauri Markkanen is one of those young stars that came out, had a breakout season last year. Right, it was him and SGA, in my opinion, that really say, hey, like I'm that guy. You have to draft me earlier than I was drafted or projected last season. Right, so Lauri was almost borderline, maybe rosterable, maybe not, maybe just cyclable in a lot of leagues, right? But I feel like after last season, he was like, "Hey, I'm a must roster player. You have to grab me at that. Like you have to put some respect on my name, right?" We look at his stats: 66 fantasy points, 66 games played. My bad. 66 games played, averaging 41.2 fantasy points per game, right? He's also a forward, right? Like I said, there's not a lot of forwards in the league. In ESPN, draftable, right? So you have to kind of grab forwards. And Lauri Markkanen is one of those forwards that, hey, he has a lot of upside. Last year was his breakout season. Who knows what we can do this year, right? There shouldn't be too much concern about him getting his own bucket on the Utah, right? I do think that Utah is probably gonna make him the face of Utah, the face of Utah for a little bit at least.
Yeah, there isn't much concern with him with his role in Utah. I think he's proven it. There's a slight concern with John Collins entering the roster, but I don't think John Collins will be good enough for Lauri Markkanen to lose significant production or minutes. You still have to keep in mind because they are trading for a 20 mil contract. They're definitely going to play him. He's definitely going to be in the roster. And I don't think they want to really reduce Walker Kessler's minutes. Walker Kessler looks really good. So I think maybe he'll slide into small forward for a little bit, but I think Lauri Markkanen is really solid right here.
Yeah. Let's move on from Lauri. We have the other forward, the other second star of the Knicks as well, Julius Randle. Right, just take a look at the games played. He played 77 games, averaging 41 fantasy points. So this guy is definitely one of the top forwards that is very, very consistent. Right, you can always trust him to play that game, plays almost every single game of the season, and put up a good average too, 41 fantasy points. I understand that he is playing behind Brunson now, so maybe his numbers might get a little better, might drop, but I feel like averaging 40 to 41 is very solid, from coming from Randle already. And the fact that he plays 77 games, I feel like he's definitely belongs in tier 3, right? This season, I'm not expecting much of a change. Like I said, I do think he's gonna have a decent season, maybe even a good season this year, right? I know people have recency bias of saying, "Hey, man, this guy doesn't do well in the playoffs," but don't forget what he did in the season, though, right? In the season, he's a he's a star player, right? He does play almost every single game, and he averages good average for a forward, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Randle is like the safe play. 77 games. That just speaks for itself.
Yeah.
All right. So our next player in tier 3 will be Mikal Bridges.
So going on Mikal Bridges, I know a lot of people might be surprised that why we put Mikal here. We haven't seen him. We haven't seen enough of what he has done in Brooklyn. So does he really belong in tier 3? Well, the two champions talking right now, we do believe that Mikal Bridges does belong in tier 3, right? We'll explain to you our reasoning, right? So he played every single game last season. Every single game played last season. I know the average is 36, but I promise you that average is not right in per se, because that 36 is average of his total season, right? You have to understand he played the majority of season as a role player, playing behind Devin Booker, Chris Paul, right? You have to understand, hey, now he's going into a role where he's going to have more touches, he'll have more shots, have more playmaking abilities, right? So those are definitely going to boost his average up this season, right? And the fact that if he's still able to play 83 games, I feel like this guy, drafting him here is a no-brainer, in my opinion, right? Anson will get you the stats of how much he averaged, near the end of the season. But yeah, I think Mikal Bridges definitely belongs in tier 3. I feel like I'm looking for MIP candidate this year as well, and even having a great season. Like, I feel like he can take a jump this year, and next season he might even be in tier 2 for Mikal Bridges, right?
Yeah, so his last 27 games, Mikal Bridges averaged 39.8 fantasy points per game, which is significantly higher when it comes to, his regular average of 36. But you also have to keep in mind that he he didn't necessarily sit out his last two games, but he kind of checked in, fouled someone and then hopped back to the bench in like 10 seconds time. So he got two big fat zeros to keep his consecutive games play streak. He played 83 games, amazing. But it dropped his fantasy points, which, 39.8 would actually be an understatement when you're valuing Mikal Bridges. You should value him at 43 fantasy points per game because that's how much he averaged in the 25 games. If you take out the last two games of the season where he, kind of just sat out. So 43 fantasy points per game, you take that into consideration with the fact that, okay, this is also his first time being a scoring option, being like he's a number one scoring option. He's never even been a top 3 or top 2 scoring option before, in his NBA career. So, he adjusted to that very well. He was able to average 26 points in his last 27 games in Brooklyn. And like I said, that 26 is kind of skewed because of his last two games. So it's about 28 points per game. So he's very comfortable as the number one option. I think he still has a lot of room to improve because it's such a small sample size of him playing as the number one option. And also, it's just great to have a player that plays every single game. I can't, guarantee you that he'll play every single game this year. If you draft him and he gets hurt next year, don't blame me. But, if you just look at his record, he's proven, super reliable, 83 games. If he can give you another 80 games, even if he doesn't live up to the 45 fantasy points standard that we have for tier 3, I think, even if he averages only 42, I think you still get a lot of value here.
Yeah, definitely agree. The big value bonus he gets is playing the 83 games, right? Moving on from Mikal Bridges, right? We have the one and only Victor Wembanyama, right? So I know a lot of people are still unsure where Victor should be ranked as. I know a lot of people, doing mock drafts are grabbing Victor very early, or really letting him slide. But I think more than not, a lot of people are grabbing him early, right? It's very, very hard to put a value on how he's valued, right? He could be tier 2 material. He could be, right? Or, knock on wood, if he gets injured, he just out for the rest of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if the Spurs are like, hey, let's tank another season and we'll try to grab another player that can play alongside Victor and we'll build a contending team slowly. Right. I wouldn't be surprised if they want to do something like that. Right. So, he hasn't played a single NBA game yet besides the summer league. So I feel like him becoming the number one option and him also becoming a power forward, right? There's release that he's going to be playing alongside Zach Collins and Zach Collins will be center, right? We'll kind of see how he plays. I do have high hopes for him. I don't think he's going to be terrible at fantasy. I think he's definitely still going to be must rosterable for sure, right? But Victor Wembanyama, it's one of those players that, hey, if you want to grab him a little bit earlier, you could, right? Oh, by the way, we put him back here doesn't mean, he's not good or anything. It's just that we're still unsure because if you want to grab him over a few other guys, in tier 3, that's totally fine as well, right? Is there anything else you want to add to Victor, Anson?
Yeah, for Victor, like Alan said, it's just hard to judge him because we have no idea what to expect. But if you want to go by, what the consensus is expecting from Victor Wembanyama, I think it is pretty reasonable for him, especially in the San Antonio Spurs with nobody, to average 20 points per game. I think it's very reasonable to predict that he's gonna average 10 rebounds per game just because of his height. So if he's a 20 and 10 guy, we're looking at someone kind of like Bam Adebayo. Bam averaged 20.4 and 9.2. So if you just go based on that number, Bam did average 39 fantasy points per game, which wouldn't exactly, that's why Bam's not in this tier. He doesn't meet that benchmark. But if you analyze Victor's game as a whole, and you realize how he's getting that 20 and 10, he does shoot more threes. He'll have a 3-point bonus in ESPN's point leagues. And I expect him to get more blocks than Bam. You know, Bam's a great defender, but I think he only averaged 0.8 blocks per game last year. With Victor's height, you know, internationally he averaged 2.7. So, you know, it's hard to project if he'll keep that um in the NBA, but it's very hard for me to believe that, you know, if the Spurs are serious about Victor Wembanyama, which it clearly looks like it, they're gonna run him maybe 35 minutes per game. You know, it's really hard for me to believe that he's not gonna average 2 blocks per game just putting his hands up in the paint.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with you there. But yeah, like I said, that'll end our list right here. We're ending off on Victor Wembanyama, right? Maybe the unicorn that everyone is talking about, maybe the alien everyone's talking about, right? But yeah, that should wrap up our video. Is there anything else you want to add, Anson?
Yeah, make sure if you guys disagree with us, let us know in the comment section so we can have a, you know, have a little discussion. Let us know what you guys think. We're very interested in that. And also, if you guys want to, if you guys want to know about tier 4, tier 5, tier 6, we're dropping that very soon. So make sure you subscribe and follow for more.
Yeah, yeah. And if that's it, then right, I hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Hope you guys have a great fantasy season. And yeah, good luck. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Peace.